Well, I'll actually kind of take a step back and say that I think that of all the challenges most of the store owners are going through, I mean, if you're it, one of our clients, but one of our larger clients, they're no longer with us. They're at another 3PL now. They saw layoffs, and they're a large funded organization. And there are small clients that we work with that are concerned about how am I going to make payroll? Our sales going to continue to be down? We have a lot of other clients that have things up. And as business leadership, even in our case, who we felt really prepared going into this thing, every day is a variable that's very, very difficult to account for. And I think what people forget to do is to sit down and ask themselves, what's most important for me to be working on today, every day? And in a situation like this, where you can have 50 things to potentially work on, knowing what the most important to do can be really difficult.
Mm.
And so the thing that I always remind, myself about, and I remind a lot of other business leaders about, is this concept that they teach you when you're learning to fly a plane. And when I first started getting my pilot's license a handful of years ago, you get up in the air and it's so overwhelming. I mean, you can pull back, you can push forward on the yoke, you can turn left, right, push on the rudders, change the radio, do a million different things. But what they tell you is that when you're in an emergency, the most important thing for you to do is to fly the plane. And you might fly into a cloud, or you might end up in some weather, something that you really have no way to kind of account for, or no experience navigating. And so they just tell you, like, get rid of everything and focus on the thing that you actually know, which is keeping the plane level and the wings level, and making sure that you're not going up and upside down or down and straight into the ground. And then as you have a better sense of which way is up and down and left and right, then you can kind of start adding complexity onto what you're doing. And so for our organization with my store, I sell a lot of, the mural that's behind me is all Texas related stuff. And I sell a lot of products to Texans through our social media feed called Texas Humor. So we've got millions of followers that, love buying our t-shirts and stuff. But at the end of the day, our products are nice to have. So I don't sell disinfecting liquids. I don't sell, masks or gloves or anything like that. So almost immediately, between just people being freaked out about having to stay home and losing their job, and the fact that my customer base is really heavily based in Houston and Dallas and Central Texas, where the oil crash has actually really affected people, our store has just completely been turned upside down. And so a ton of my clients out here in the facility are just having gangbusters, like sales like crazy they've never seen before. Mine, I mean, we're really having to, figure things out. And so I went to my director of marketing and I said, hey, look, just keep your wits about you. That's most important. Nobody likes desperation, even people that want to help. It really does not lend yourself to having successful business in the long term if you start acting really desperate. So what are the things that we could do as an organization to really, focus on what matters? And so we said, what is the thing about Texas Humor in particular that makes us really unique, that will really stand out? And our brand has always been a really big source of positivity. So we really focused on that and saying, the reason we exist in the first place is because we make killer content. So let's really, really focus on the content and then start figuring out small bits at a time. What can we add on in terms of marketing? I think, to the earlier point about just not being tone deaf and making sure that you miss the mark, it's so important to not just suddenly like flood your feed with marketing because you're trying to figure out how to make, rent or how to pay your vendors or what have you. Again, the comment that was made earlier about the fact that all of us are going through this together isn't even just unique to our customers. When you're thinking about cash flow, if you're not talking to your vendors and talking to everybody else about, hey, I'm concerned about my income, or I'm concerned about this or that, suddenly now you've got 50 things financially to be concerned with while you're trying to be a really successful creative marketer. And so take as much of that stuff off your plate and push it as far out as possible by either getting, some sort of rent abatement or talking to your vendors and letting them know that you're going to pay. You just need a little bit of flexibility right now. Because what I've seen as, someone who was in the advertising industry before I got into this industry is that if you are desperate and rushing to judgment, you don't have the best ideas. Really, desperation is not a place for really solid creative thinking. And so it's so important to really just focus in and say, what is my greatest skill? What do I bring to my business that I'm just exceptional at? How do I fly this plane right now? So that way, when this thing does blow over, my business is still very successful. I don't throw everything about it that I built out the window, and I still have a really solid foundation to land on. And so, for a lot of our merchants, the first week or two is really, really scary, and people were really kind of unsure of themselves and where things were going to go. But long term, what's happened is that, a lot of those businesses have really taken off. And so for our facility, there were a lot of things that had to change. We're only allowed to have a certain number of people in enclosed spaces. So my leadership team had to get together and pivot around, a brand new schedule that accommodated having no more than about 10 people in any given space within our facility, which meant that we had to break out these new schedules and all of this stuff. And so not only was it just a completely new schedule, all of the things that were great about the culture at our organization are now completely different. Half of my team is working from home. And so every day we really had to sit down and just remind ourselves it's time to fly the plane. And what does that mean today? So that way I know that I'm making the right decisions in the right kind of vacuum and not trying to just change everything. Because if you'll remember back to our, sixth or seventh grade science classes, when you're going and working through an experiment, it's important to have a control so you know that whatever change in variables you add to the equation, what is actually having an effect positively or negatively on your business. And so, I'm seeing on sort of direct to consumer Twitter, there are a lot of really great explorations into this of how much of this is that people are starting to get the $1,200 into their bank accounts right now. How much of this is that my product is something people need? There are so many variables that it's just really, really important to control for a certain number of those. So on the shipping side, I think that the points that were made about over communicating are really key, and the fact that customers just want to be supportive, and going back to the concept of leveraging this equity that we have, the fact that we're all going through it together is so important, because you can get away with that a couple of times. I remember a handful of years ago when it was still just my wife and I running our store. We had a killer Black Friday, had more orders coming in than we had ever seen before in our lives, and we had one employee. And we got back to Austin and started shipping, and we knew it was going to take 5 or 6 days. And we emailed our customers, and that first batch of people who got that email said, "Oh, it's great. I'm so thankful for your success, and we're here for it." But 4 or 5 days come along, and I'm not communicating quite as much because we're still trying to climb out of this thing. That's when people start getting frustrated. That they're in it when they first are understanding, but there's only so long that you can, kind of point to that and say that this is a problem. And so the last thing I'll say is that it's so important to stop and fix. And so once you've got your feet underneath you and you understand what the problem is that you're trying to tackle, and you understand what it means to fly the plane, now it's important to start saying, well, what's breaking down? The plane's on fire, but why is it on fire? Is it because someone lit a cigarette in here? Is it that the motor, caught on fire? Or is there an electrical fire? And start going through and testing those things out. And so if you start to see success and your store turns around, or maybe if it's not, it's important to really go back and really try to assess what's broken and then spend time fixing it, and you'll hear a lot as you grow the difference between working in your business and on top of it. And in these moments of extreme duress, it's really important to pull yourself out of the business, even if it feels like you don't have the time, and get on top and try to understand what's wrong with this plane that I'm flying right now. So that way I can land it as safely as possible.